Today we are going to talk about some real negativity. Instead of the I hate Overwatch video I see in my recommended every other day, it will be the top 5 most disappointing Overwatch League team seasons. This could be a team that was very hyped in Overwatch League, then failed expectations, or one that was so good throughout the regular season, you think they'll win it, and then they get clapped in the playoffs. The first roster is a team I initially did not want to put here, but I remember the endless, non-stop praise and hype for the 2021 Washington Justice. Clearly, this roster was supposed to be a legendary one. Going into that season, some people had them at number 1 seed over Glads, Shock, Dallas Fuel, even Shanghai at times. So I feel it's fair to have this roster here, considering how excited people seem to be. Now, looking at it initially, there were some reasons to be happy. Mag was the big boss, literally and in-game. Claims of him becoming the Rookie of the Year were tossed around before the season even started, performing exceptionally well on Runaway and Korean contenders. Fury joined the roster from Fusion, a champion, one of the best off-tanks of all time, coming off of his best year to date. There were times he was scraping the Choihyobin and Void level on Diva or Sigma in 2020. People claimed this would be a top-tier tank line. Their DPS had 2 apparent superstars, Decay, a player who quite literally carried Washington in the 2020 play-ins, knocking out 3 higher standing teams during the Hog Zarya meta. Also showed some great performances on Dallas Fuel before he benched himself due to that team being dogshit. Next was Assassin, coming with Mag from Runaway, an exceptionally talented flex player, a superstar if you will. Then we got Jerry from Boston Uprising to be the hitscan player. Nice to see him on a roster that isn't the equivalent of being in jail, or so we thought. Tuba was also here, but he didn't really need to be at this point. Assassin was just taking his job away. Finally, we had the backline, which made the roster akin to that half amazing and half childlike horse drawing. Bebe and Closer was obviously a green thumb here compared to the rest. Some overlooked this, thinking Washington's DPS and tank line is so good, everything will be fine, which it was for stage 1, going 4-0, until we started to notice this weird trend of Washington with how slow they played. Watching this Washington Justice versus Florida Mayhem tournament play-in match was like watching a person in a wheelchair rolling up a hill, not sure what to do, no words can be said. It was just sad. Barely any engagements throughout some of those maps from Justice. Dorado was the worst offender of standing there and waiting for, I don't know, like something to happen, I guess. This was a common trend, that or Assassin being the most hot and cold player this game has ever seen. Some days he was genuinely good. Other times, it looked as if he didn't deserve a salary. The whole Memp meme came from him. His somber performances is basically the embodiment of Krusty's coaching. One day you are awestruck at how amazing it is. The next you're wondering if he can tie his shoes without an aid. Decay was the only person there who seemed to have any bit of talent. You'd think Fury would be in that conversation too, but he had a shit year compared to his 2020. I think the biggest frustration is how this whole roster had that talent is there thing. This is where it came from. One match, they looked like a top tier team, almost knocking out Dallas Fuel. Then right afterwards, they look like a bottom 3 team right next to Vancouver Titans or London Spitfire, just completely lost and everyone forgot how to play. Viewers really wanted this team to be good so badly, but that hope turned into hatred. Never in my life have I seen a team as inconsistent as this one, with the amount of comments and people saying how good this team was going to be before that year started. This is what you get for praising the Washington Justice. To be fair, they did make playoffs at bottom seed, getting knocked out first obviously. This was the first and only season Washington Justice ever made it there, so at least they have something. The next is a team that pissed in a lot of people's cereal bowls, the 2018 Dallas Fuel, made out of Team Envy primarily, with other pieces rotating in and out a lot. Naturally, this team was immediately going to have a ton of eyes on it because 2 massive streamers were a part of the roster, Seagull and XQC. With the successes of Envy players, Rogue players, and 2 big streamers on board, expectations were set really high. I wouldn't say as high as London Spitfire, NYXL, or even Seoul Dynasty, who I debated putting in this exact spot. Those Apex teams were disgusting, so them getting a minimum of top 4 was what everyone prepared themselves for. When it came to Dallas, a realistic expectation would be top 5, top 6 at minimum, with them being able to punch up, and sadly, it did not go that way. Their first match in 2018 is the biggest troll of all time, Seoul Dynasty versus the Dallas Fuel. You think you're watching two great teams battle it out, but in reality, you're getting lied to the entire time. Both of these teams were not good, and I'm sure they were aware of it too. And as we saw with Dallas, it continued to get worse and worse from here. At least Seoul had stages where they looked good. Stage 1 and Stage 2 was a 7-3 run, not bad whatsoever. Now, if we do a quick rundown of the Dallas Fuel stages, a team who has a viewer expectation to be in the top 5 range, by the way, it goes Stage 1, 3-7, Stage 2, 2-8, Stage 3, 1-9, Stage 4, 6-4. It speaks for itself, being below all expectations. I'm not going to go into each stage because that will take way too long for this type of video. This team was just bad, like really bad. I think the only takeaway players who were actually considered good by the end of the season were OG, Rascal, and Effect, who burned himself out playing the game, trying so hard on a team that sucks as bad as this one did. Plus, Rascal and Effect didn't even make it to the end of the year. From what I understand, this team was a boiling teapot when it comes to internal conflict, problems, the amount of times I've seen fuck Kai by viewers, claiming Dallas basically didn't have a coach until partway through the year because of how bad Kai was, problems with Rascal being very toxic supposedly. Now, obviously, there are a lot of Reddit classics out there, people just making stuff up, so I only take what is credible seriously, such as the overall drama with Rascal and Costa himself mentioning how Dallas Fuel was a shit show level disaster internally. Also, as viewers, being able to see something like Seagull playing Diva, people leaving and joining frequently, memes like the AKM Blade, clearly something was not right here. Stage 4 is where things slowly started to come together, the Mickey Brigg niche strat. Somehow a disgusting, abhorrent hero like that was a niche strategy. It's crazy how it turned the team around, you know, balanced hero. Congratulations to Mickey for this. Dallas ended the season 12-28, bottom 4, much worse than anyone anticipated. On a more positive note, Fuel fans got to enjoy many more years of bad teams after this one. The next spot is for the 2023 Shock, a roster people hyped up to no end, considering how well this roster performed in contenders. They were quite literally dominating Korean contenders, which is like tier 2 on hard mode. Player quality is very high in that region, so if a team's ever pulling off performances like these guys did, expectations will be going through the roof. Getting that core, adding Proper and Vindime, who was great in 2022, who wouldn't initially be overly positive here? Instead, imagine 2019 Titans being a dogshit team. That is essentially the severity of 2023 Shock. You had Heesong and Proper for DPS. On paper, that is default top tier, especially from what we've seen from Heesong recently. That's how he was in contenders. Proper is just Proper, coming off of his 2022 season, a fucking animal. Max and Junbin, Fearless and Hanbin Jr. right there. Finn and Vindime was the weakest part of the roster, but not weak in the sense of something like Bebe and Closer for 2021 Washington Justice. Regardless, people were still excited, but what we got is something our eyes should never be punished with. It's also funny how this season opened up the exact same way as 2018 Dallas Fuel and Seoul Dynasty did. You think you're watching two top tier teams battle it out, but no, you're not in the slightest. When looking at these Shock players, Vindime is the hot topic when it comes to them. The amount of turbo inting from a player has not been done since the days of Silver 3 on 2021 Valiant. I don't know what happened. On Seoul Dynasty, he was genuinely good. Not the greatest main support in the world, but definitely not this Shock performance. Renko genuinely looked better than him when he came in later in the season. Finn was atrociously bad as well. This could also be due to Vindime being more interested in win trading than peeling, but again, compared to his 2022 performances, they were lackluster. Heesong and Proper DPS line was a flaccid penis, which is nuts because you'd expect these two to be pub stomping lobbies. I get we were in a Sombra meta, which is what a lot of people chalk these performances down to, but I think it stems a lot deeper than that. Heesong and Proper share the same hero pool. You want both to play Genji or Tracer. Obviously, that cannot happen most of the time. The endless rotation of who plays what was jarring, which is where I think the issues arose from. Like, you'd have Proper play Hitscan on one map, then Heesong plays it on the next map, or if they were ever playing Tracer Sombra, you got a map where Proper plays Tracer and Heesong plays Sombra, then they switch roles on the map afterwards. There was a clear lack of direction here. Max and Junbin were probably the best performing players, and that's not even to say they were great, just fine. The roster had to get retooled because it was not working in the slightest. Vindime and Heesong got dropped, going to different teams. Vindime went back to Seoul and Heesong to Titans. Just watching this hyped as hell Shock roster end the first stage 3-5 at 10th seed is still fake news to this very day, but it actually happened. On top of this season overall for Shock was also their worst since 2018. The only times Shock did not make playoffs was 2018 and 2023. Every other year, they were either locked in or went through play-ins. Interesting to see that happens after picking up one of the most hyped rosters in history. If I had to guess what really happened here, aside from brain-dead decisions like making Junbin play off-tank and Max play main tank, there may have been a lack of real leadership as a player here. Everyone was young, obviously flying to a new country you've never lived in, can't speak the language of anyone else really. Having another player as a role model or guide for them most likely could have helped. I really think if Violet did not leave the Shock after 2022, this roster could have been better. Essentially a person to wrangle up the cows, plus you'd also have a real main support. The one thing I can say for certain though is that this is one of the most disappointing teams in Overwatch history. Our next roster is very recent, but still one of the most upsetting. The 2023 Atlanta Reign. This roster is probably the best on this list, at least on paper, outside of the tank role. Even compared to the number 1 team on this list, don't care. Chio and Fielder is one of the best backlines you could possibly ask for. Vigilante was also here. People hyped him up a lot, but he rarely ever played, so how is anyone supposed to gauge that? Unless he was some sort of Zephyr type scrim god or something. You honestly don't even need him though. I'm sure everyone would have the utmost confidence in Chio and Fielder, no matter what. Lip Stalker as a DPS lineup. You got the greatest player of all time, and then Stalker became one of the best performing tracers in the entire world. Only lackluster part was the tank line, but to be fair, Donghak performed quite well considering having zero hype behind him. If you can get him on Winston, you will be fine. Other heroes, not so much. And then finally, we have Hawk. He was good in Overwatch 1. In Overwatch 2, he never showed any promising performances, but people still had the faith in his abilities and overall had this team at number 1 seed in preseason power rankings. As expected, Atlanta was dominating everyone for the first half of 2023. Houston was their only real competition, having an 8-0 stage, winning midseason very convincingly, even ending the year great at 14-2, slightly weaker as the year went on after those Sombra nerfs and meta shifts. Regardless, 14-2 is a great year on top of having one of the most dominant stages of all time. As we waited for the playoffs to actually start, rumblings were oozing through the holes, rumors of Atlanta looking to sign an emergency tank, where Gator had to come out publicly and say that was not true. They are sticking with their current roster. Some didn't believe it, as conspiracy theorists usually don't. People assumed there were some internal problems going on, and initially, Atlanta was not messing around, going against Hangzhou Spark, beating their ass, up 2-0, giving hope to the people. All those Atlanta rumors were hogwash, and then they got reverse swept. Shy had a match, that's all we'll chalk this down to. And after map 2, it just genuinely looked like Atlanta wasn't alive anymore, all the gas was out of the tank, and for the rest of playoffs, this was the narrative. The rest of playoffs being one more match, of course, against London Spitfire. A very depressing defeat. This match was not close at all. It appeared no one was even trying after the Hangzhou loss, or looked to have no idea what to do. Even though Boston gave the blueprint on how to win, they beat London 2 times with the exact same comp. Quite literally, these are the CarQ tips and tricks, and it wasn't digested. Atlanta just died on their hill. Once again, this appeared to be from internal drama. I'm sure we're all aware of the Chio versus Donghak ultimate battle behind the scenes. Donghak was obviously going to be the target since he is the youngest person on the team. Unfortunate reality in cultures like this. According to Gator on Uncoachable, he mentioned how there was a pushback from the Korean players to play a full Korean lineup since he apparently wanted to play Hawk initially. Kind of ironic if you ask me. If these guys are ready to knock Donghak out, why would they want him to play? Honestly, I think Gator should have just forced Hawk to play if that's what he really felt was correct, And just this whole situation is very sad. Atlanta was so dominant in the regular season. At a minimum, they should have been top 4. Undeniably, by anyone, even if you don't like Atlanta Reign, this roster was stacked beyond belief. Their regular season was stupendous, #1 seed, destroying the year, and then bombing out 7th place in playoffs. It's pretty rough. Definitely one of the most disappointing moments in Overwatch history. For honorable mentions, one is obviously Seoul Dynasty 2018. Lunatic High was an amazing Apex roster, so seeing them not reach top 4 was quite depressing. Gladiators in 2021 is a good shout as well, having a much earlier drop out of playoffs than most anticipated. Guangzhou Charge from 2023 started really well, then the org decided to make changes as that year started to end, preparing to exit Overwatch League. Gladiators from 2023, who fell in that exact same category, should not have been a bottom 3 team. Those are a few extra ones that I thought of that I wanted to mention here. I'm sure you probably have more, so make sure to leave a comment of what those teams are. Our final team is the 2018 NYXL, one of the most famous and probably most dominant roster of all time, considering how many matches were in Season 1. Going 34-6 is quite the accomplishment. Having some of the best players you could possibly ask for during this time period. Jonak was here, the MVP, reaching all 4 stage finals, the only time this achievement was ever accomplished for seasons that had 4 stages. They won 2 of them back to back. The only way this dominance could have been surpassed was if Shanghai won 3 stage finals in 2021. NYXL was just the clear-cut best team during this season. Like seriously, if these guys did not lose a match to Boston in stage 3, they would have went on a 23 match win streak. So needless to say, the heaviest possible favorites for playoffs, more so than anyone else in Overwatch history, aside from, again, the 2021 Shanghai Dragons. It's also important to mention how for Stage 4, NYXL started sandbagging, meaning they were not scrimming as much. They still made the stage finals during that too, which is insane. Even still, sandbagging is going to raise questions regardless. When it comes to sandbagging, in my eyes, I don't really see the mentality behind it. But this wasn't going to take away from the NYXL being the clear-cut best at the end. When it came to the playoffs, they were further in the bracket, awaiting the winner of Fusion versus Boston Uprising. It was a back and forth, but Fusion ended up taking it. So we got stuck with an actual David versus Goliath match, bottom seed versus the top seed. But clearly, NYXL is going to grab Carpe and his dork friends, send them all packing, and take that grand final spot. But the first match they played, Fusion 3-0'd NYXL, and it was kind of like, uh-oh, that's not good. Maybe sandbagging wasn't a good idea. In match 2, it did actually go to map 5, but of course, NYXL fucking lost and gave everyone the same face as Mike Wazowski here. Looking across this entire game's history again, even Atlanta losing to London, there's no way any other playoffs match has been this big of an upset. Whereas I do think the 2023 Atlanta Reigns roster is better than the NYXL, it still doesn't take away how NYXL during this time period was the king roster, the purely best team, unbelievable season, losing to Philadelphia Fusion of all people. I'm not entirely sure why NYXL wasn't playing the meta, which was Hanzo, because he was broken as hell. This is when he first got the storm arrows. It was just overpowered beyond belief. Just a very confusing overall situation, and I'm sure most are in the same camp of being disgusted by this. NYXL making grand finals should have been an easy lock-in, but sadly, it did not go that way. Those are my most disappointing Overwatch League seasons. Make sure to leave yours in the comments below too, but I'm sure everyone will share NYXL at the number 1. I don't see it otherwise. Thank you for watching to the end. Be sure to subscribe if you haven't already. Check out my last video as well on a very underrated man that nobody seems to respect and the community really needs to start.